now, Property Monday continues as Margaret Lomas and her team answer all on Your Money, Your Call.
Hello and welcome once again to our Monday night property edition of Your Money, Your Call. My name is Bradley Beer from BMT Tax Depreciation, filling in for Margaret Lomas, and this week we have a great show all ready to go. Fantastic panel on hand to answer your questions. Helping me to field your inquiries tonight is Steve Waters from Wright Property Group and Tony Hayek from Blue Wealth Property. Tonight we're focusing on what the election means for property investors, followed by more analysts predicting the future of property, and as always, I'm very happy to take any depreciation-related questions. You can be part of the show tonight in a number of ways, either with a comment about our headline topics, a question of your own, or just give us feedback. And you can do this by calling 1300 34 35 or email now at property@skynews.com.au. Thanks for being with us tonight. Let's sit back and enjoy the program. So guys, the election, I think finally we've come to the conclusion that someone's actually won it, so the Australian people have spoken. And I guess, you know, probably want to talk first a little about the investor activity up to and before the election. Now, both of you guys deal with property investors all the time. So, Steve, you know, what's the sentiment? What happens before the election in your business?
Look, usually it's, you know, whether it's a state election or a federal election, the buyers tend to back off a little bit. But what we found this time is it was the actual sellers hanging on to stock. Listings were down, buyers were still strong, but trying to find the stock was the issue this time around.
And Tony, how about yourself? You know, you're dealing in a different type of property to Steve a lot of the time. And
yep.
what's sort of happened to this election, and what normally happens in your business up to this time?
Normally, I think what happens in our business is what happens in Steve's, you know, and I think it happens right across the industry. For some reason, investors believe that some sort of change in government is going to somehow have a significant impact on the marketplace. History shows that that's absolutely not true. It just seems to come and go, and not much seems to change. I actually believe that the sentiment that we're feeling in the marketplace right now started in about September last year. And so a lot of people are walking around blaming the election, but it actually wasn't the election. It happened a long time before that. And I think it was when the Sydney market, which is Australia's biggest marketplace, started to slow down a little. And all of a sudden, people got a little bit nervous, people got a little bit anxious. What's going to happen now? The big market that was really driving a lot of the media discussion was now changing. And of course, with that, the media opinion started to change. And then by the time the election rolled around, there was 6 months worth of media negativity. And I think that probably had a much bigger impact on market sentiment than the reality of the election.
Yeah. I think in our business at BMT, we see throughout times, especially federal elections, we can sort of see a dip in the numbers always around the time, because it's really odd, because people don't order depreciation schedules straight away when they buy a property, but they still tend to slow off their decisions about everything, because we're something that relates to a purchase of a property that they've already made, they've already decided upon, but the election comes around and often the sentiment of, well, we don't know what's going to happen, so we won't buy a depreciation schedule. Yeah. And I think we see that even when there's different media that's negative towards property, you kind of see a little bit of a sentiment number change to our numbers.
Well, I think sometimes it's just the excuse someone needs to do nothing at the end of the day. But I think a well-versed investor will probably see through all that sort of stuff and just plough through it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all know, being in the industry for as long as we have been, that markets like this are actually the ones that provide most opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, you know, I was talking to my team today. We've got a big presentation tomorrow night, and we're just running through the slideshow. And we're just talking about some data. Only 7.9% of all Australians own an investment property. 8%, less than 8%, 8 in 100. So most people will go through their whole lifetime and never make a decision to buy an investment property, never take the plunge because fear cripples them for one reason or another. And we know, if you roll back any Australian 10 years ago in their marketplace, if they bought a property that they could potentially afford, they would have made $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 worth of profit. So, you know, I think the excuse making, using the election as an excuse, is probably very appropriate. Yeah.
I think rolling up to this election, the fact that we all deal with property investors here, and the negative gearing changes that were potentially on the table should it be a Labor win, and also the capital gains tax changes, really probably left investors a little bit more uncertain about, I guess, the landscape after the time of what it would look like. Even though really any of those changes, should they have happened, we were looking at them happening, in another 12 months' time.
Yeah.
But people still make decisions, and a lot of media I've read over the last little while has talked about through the election and before the election, still talked about those changes, what impact they might have, debates either way.
Yeah, I actually think, because of exactly what you said, that certain parts of the market were perhaps perpetuated just to capitalise on if the gearing was abolished. I don't think people really understood or fully understood what the consequences were, or even how it would unroll or unpack from there, because it still had to get through the Senate. It was still a long time in the making before it was rubber stamped, so to speak. But people make decisions based on the spur of the moment.
I agree, and I think, call me a sceptic, and I'm not normally a sceptic. I'm a pretty glass half full kind of guy, but I don't reckon negative gearing was going to change under either government, right? For me, I always relate it to a game of State of Origin. We're in State of Origin season, the old cattle dog call. Bill Shorten was getting absolutely pasted, wasn't he, in the polls, right? So Malcolm Turnbull had an election lead that we've never seen before in history. So, like a good sporting match, when a team's getting flogged, what do they normally do? They start a fight, right? The only way that Bill Shorten was going to bridge that gap was if he started a fight and really ruffled the government, and that's exactly what he did. And the two topics he brought up, one was negative gearing, which he knows is a topic of significant interest to Australians, and the other one, of course, was GST. Now, GST he dismissed straight away, but he made the mistake of not dismissing the negative gearing discussion straight away, and Bill Shorten used that as his the linchpin of his comeback, essentially. And I think, the concept of applying negative gearing only to new property is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, I'm a business, we're a business that sells only new property. For my business, it'd be great. But that's not what the property market needs, and it's certainly not appropriate for Australian investors. And it won't deliver what they said it was going to deliver. So I'm, sceptical about whether or not it would ever have seen the light of day.
Yeah, I think the debate, if we look back, it started with a little bit of both sides make a bit of a change, and it really became an election issue as opposed to a good policy issue. If you look at the slight changes that the Liberals suggested from the start, which was to maybe cap it at a certain number of properties and to maybe cap the amount you could actually claim against other income, then it was okay, let's look at adjusting policy as opposed to an all-out radical change. And then as soon as the Labor Party or Bill Shorten came and said, well, we're going to abolish it completely, it then became no longer a debate about good policy. And I think that's probably one of the big things that became a problem is that the slight changes disappeared.
I think the tweaks were a good idea. I think the capping it was probably a good idea. Wouldn't suit me personally, but certainly, that data that we're looking at today, less than 1% of Australians own 5 properties or more. And so it probably would have been an appropriate shift, an appropriate change that would have had a small impact on a minority group that then would have brought a bit more money into the coffers, and cap that whole concept of unlimited. I didn't mind that tweak.
Look, Steve, I think a lot of your clients, having seen what you do recommend a lot of the time, don't often take advantage of negative gearing in second-hand properties that you buy for them, right?
Well, we all know that it's there, or people should know that it's there, but for us, the whole gearing effect is an afterthought. It's just cash in, cash out for us, and the whole notion of gearing being abolished at the end of the day really didn't faze us in the slightest, to be honest with you. In fact, in a sick kind of way, we were looking forward to it because I thought there was going to be some opportunities that presented themselves based on the mass hysteria and the negativity within the market. And then if I was a betting man pre-election, I would have nearly bet for sure that somewhere down the track they would have reintroduced it and it would have been back to a normal playing field. But at the end of the day, It's not going to happen.
And look, I think the major change is the problem, because it's such a major change, changes housing so much, and good policy I think we're all for. We're in this property industry, and we're all for good policy that affects property in a positive way, because the property industry employs a lot of people. Perhaps you have a comment to make. If so, why not give us a call now on 1300 30 34 35, or email at property@skynews.com.au. Thanks for tuning in. If you also have a question for us tonight, make sure you ask it, because if you do, you may be in the running to receive one of Margaret's books, selling in the stores for $39.95. As we do every week, at the end of the show, the panel and I choose one question from either the emails or the calls, and we send a copy of one of Margaret's books. This week, the best question we'll receive her brand new book, How to Achieve Property Success. And if you're ready to invest, this book will make sure you cover every single part of the process. To get hold of your copy, you have to ask a question by calling 1300 30 34 35, or emailing us at property@skynews.com.au. Then make sure you watch at the end of the show to see if you're the lucky person. We're heading off for our first break, but we won't be gone for long, so stay tuned. You can email while we're gone, and we'll get back to your question as soon as we can. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me this Monday night. I'm Bradley Beer, and joining me tonight is Steve Waters from Wright Property Group and Tony Hayek from Blue Wealth Property. Now, don't waste any time. Call us now on 1300 30 34 35, or of course you can email on property@skynews.com.au. We have Paul on the line from Perth. Paul, you have a question?
Yes, I've just in the process of setting up my own super fund, and I was looking at investing in property and borrowing in the super fund to do so. So I've been doing a little bit of my own research, and one of the things that disturbs me is the amount of interest-only loans as a percentage of the total mortgage percent. That sort of, and the growth of that in the last 3 years seems to be quite huge. I know that super funds, as far as residential property, is quite low at the moment, but to me, that's an alarming percentage of interest-only loans, and the growth of those loans. It scares me to, as far as property prices moving forward over the next 10 to 15 years, I see that as a little bit of a Ponzi scheme type behaviour. What are your thoughts about the massive growth in interest-only loans and the amount of interest-only loans that are in the property sector at the moment?
Well, Paul, you know, a few issues to consider there, but I guess first on interest-only loans, Steve, what are your thoughts?
Ponzi scheme. Like that's...
I love it. He's been listening to Stephen Keane. Paul, you've been on the Stephen Keane wagon.
There's a comment I haven't heard in a long while. Look, I don't mind interest-only loans. There is a few tricks to them, though, I do believe, and one of them is you've got to be disciplined with your own money. You need to know where it's going and how to handle it at the end of the day. And it also depends on the type of asset that you're purchasing. On this particular case, property. You need to control the cost, you need to control its income. Hopefully you've bought it right to begin with, and that the growth is going to be there to help sustain it. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's anything near a Ponzi scheme, and I wouldn't be too concerned about it.
And Tony, investment in self-managed super funds, have you had much experience with that, and can you give me some of your thoughts?
We have had a lot of experience in that. We've got a few thousand clients who have bought properties in self-managed super funds over the last bunch of years. It really is a great way to buy property, but it's not appropriate for everybody. And I think one of the big problems in the industry is that there are organisations running around telling people that they should be buying property in their self-managed super fund. That is appropriate for some, but not appropriate for many. And so good advice is absolutely critical. Make sure that you're talking to your accountant or your financial planner about it before you jump in. You need to be the right age, you need to have the right type, appropriate gearing, you need to have the right contributions and so on, and structure. So, the great thing about investing in your super, of course, is it improves your tax position long term. If you buy an asset, it's capital gains tax free if you sell it in retirement, which is a great little advantage. From my perspective, going back to linking those two conversations, interest only and self-managed super funds. I know a lot of our clients have principal and interest loans inside their super because it's a much more conservative environment. However, most of our clients are interest-only investors outside of super because that's what makes sense from a tax perspective and from an asset development perspective. So, Paul, you probably need a bit more clarity around that environment before you call it a Ponzi scheme. That's a pretty
harsh call.
Pretty harsh call.
Do you have something else to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, and you mentioned a couple of really good points there. One, good advice, absolutely essential at the other day. It's already a very regulated vehicle, and so it should be. In fact, I wouldn't mind seeing more regulation around it.
Absolutely.
I think some people, the caution there is some people seem to think that their super is something that, well, it's just in the never. It's, it'll eventuate one day. And then in terms of interest only or P&I, we're very much the same in terms of our clients. Depending on where they are in their life cycle, I suppose, how close they are to retirement would be really guiding them or guiding you into which way if you're going to go interest only. Like perhaps, and not knowing everyone's circumstances, but a 21-year-old guy that somehow has amassed a fortune in his self-managed super and turned it and bought a property, well, there's probably no need for him to go interest only, all things being fair and equal. But at the end of the day, Ponzi scheme, harsh comment, harsh call. That's it.
Look, good advice from the panel, I think. Investing in self-managed super is a very personal thing that relates to your circumstances. All those things age. So the proper advice for you, as opposed to we should just do it because that's a good way to do it, because it's not for everybody. It's got a lot of complexities around it, and that's the way it should be because it's super and it's designed to be there for your retirement, not to play with on the way. Interest only, I do have a lot of interest only loans myself. I think they do come with a risk. For an investor, they're often a positive thing in the fact that you get to control some of that cash and the way it's used and be able to control that for future investments. But if you're not very organised with your money, they're not very good and you probably should pay it off. The rise, well, I guess it's people learning, or sometimes it's some risk attached. But some good advice from the panel. I think, Paul, best to go see someone about your specific circumstances with both of those things. In the news this week, it seems we've finally have come to an outcome with the election, and the bright side of this helps remove some of the uncertainty in recent weeks in relation to our property markets. Malcolm Turnbull claimed victory on Sunday, with both Bill Shorten and Turnbull raising the prospect of a more unified approach to policy in the national interest. But with the threat of a credit rating downgrade looming, the Prime Minister now has to fix the budget with a tiny majority in a difficult government. The housing and construction sectors are the bedrock of the economy at the moment, and much of this is funded by investors, including overseas investors. Turnbull needs to explain this relationship to the public so they don't just believe he's pandering to the rich investors. Turnbull announced yesterday he will reintroduce the Australian Building and Commission Construction Bill to stamp out union corruption, but he will have to work hard to have it passed. Turnbull's already elevated the national debate about urban design, appointing Minister for Cities, but the need to see the results in the form of improved public transport, more homes and strong communities. That won't happen overnight. Now, guys, we discussed the election and the fact that it was coming up and all prior to, but now we're post that date, and I think we've really actually finally got a result, which is great. I think things like we've had some uncertain government for a period of time now because we've had difficulties in getting something through, and that's why we ended up at a double disillusion election. The comment that both want to work together, to me, is good to hear, but it'd be good to see in practice. We've got risks with our banks and things, and some of the things that need to happen, Steve. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, both parties working together, well, that would be a first at the end of the day. I don't think that's possible at the end of the day. They're going to act like kids in the courtyard fighting. That's their jobs. That's what they do. Hopefully, a bit of stability now that we've had the election. I don't think anything's guaranteed. I think things will continue to be as they are. We've still got good fundamentals around us. We've got cheap money. We've got consumer confidence. We've got rising disposable income levels. All of this is pushing towards a normal market. However, there will be markets within markets at the end of the day, and I think that's where you've got to be careful.
And Tony, banks, the AAA credit rating at slight risk. We've already had APRA sort of clamping down on lending. What's your experience been with financing properties as people are coming to settlement of late?
Well, it's been more difficult in the last 6 months than it's been in my, almost 20-year property career. So, and it's had the desired effect that they'd intended. And really, from our perspective, from businesses like all of ours, really, and I said this post-GFC as well when they tightened credit, only the credit-worthy should be getting credit. And I don't think anything long-term, I don't think anything negative can come from tightening the credit legislation for investors. The difficulty, it's a little bit like the Greyhound decision that the New South Wales government's made. The difficulty is that little transition period where people have bought properties under a particular regime of finance and now are settling properties under a different regime. And I think quite often, that's the lost group. Those people that are investing now, understanding the regulations that APRA have enforced and the changes that have been made, have much more clarity as to what they're getting themselves into a year or two down the track. But for those people who committed a year or 2 or 3 ago in any property market around the country, found themselves in a tighter situation. Again, Steve's business, your business, my business is in the business of supporting clients to make sure that when things do change, that they can be supported through that process. And we've been holding our clients' hands through that process more than ever in the last few months. Yeah.
I think we often work for the investor after they've settled the property.
Yeah, of course.
It's always a bit better that investors learn how to crunch their numbers earlier, but their decision on buying depreciation schedule usually happens after the decision to buy property. They may need some sort of numbers before then, but it's a later thing in the game. But I think it'd be good to see as much as possible if we could have, maintain some of that credit rating and get these politicians to actually, can we put the call out for the politicians to actually work together a little bit better?
I can see that being a massive flop. Like, you know what? I think, this post-election period, they both got, they're both a bit freaked out. Shorten probably because he got closer than he thought, and then Turnbull because he got closer than he thought to losing. I think once the dust settles and they get back into their, normal way, I think we'll see. Yeah, I think we'll see what we've seen in the past, and that's a lack of leadership and a lot of whinging.
And we've got additional independence on our sitting in our parliament as well to actually make controlling a bit of our parliament, making these things actually a little bit tougher.
But a few good points there in terms of credit worthiness. I don't think the APRA changes are that.
No,
they're bad. It's good for the longevity within the industry. Those who shouldn't get loans shouldn't get loans, and we certainly don't want to repeat of pre-GFC where money was just so loose and how much did you want? Sign here, press hard, and it's all yours, because that was a contributing factor to what the market crash that we had. We don't want to see that again as investors. We don't want the peaks and the troughs. We want sort of that nice trajectory.
Stable.
Yeah. I think the APRA changes actually are focusing on making sure that we still have strong lending and safe lending for our investors in this country.
So it should be.
I hope you're taking a bit of time to learn a bit more about property investing tonight. We have to go for just a quick break, but we'll be back soon. If you do have a question for us, call us and join the queue on 1300 30 34 35 or email property@skynews.com.au. You never know, you could be the question of the week. We'll be right back. If you've just tuned in, you're watching Monday night property edition of Your Money, Your Call. And helping me to solve your property investing dilemmas is Steve Waters from Right Property Group and Tony Hayek from Blue Wealth Property. So call us now on 1300 30 34 35 to join the queue, or email us on property@skynews.com.au. We have a caller on the line, Nick from Sydney. Thank you for calling. Do you have a question?
Hi, panel. I've just got a question for Tony. I was just doing some research on a regional town in New South Wales called Narrandera, and reading a reputable report. I'm just looking at the increase in total value of sales over the year to March 2016, and there was a percentage change of 90.3. What should I read into that? And I've done a bit of research on this area. It does have a train line. There's also an airport about 20 minutes away, and also some infrastructure happening at the moment, but it's a very small town. There's about 5,000 people. Any ideas on this area for investing?
So you've done a fair bit of research on the area?
Yeah.
Narrandera. It's near Wagga.
What was the caller's name?
Nick.
Nick from Sydney. One of my staff is Nick from Sydney. Nick, so part of the problem with statistics quite often is that a lot of people don't quite understand the foundation of how data is analysed. Now, when I hear data like that, 90%, what it probably means is that the sample size of the data is too small, and when it's a small sample size, you can get someone selling one of the most expensive properties in the area, or 2 or 3 more expensive sales in that period, and it was significantly better than the median type property in the area, and all of a sudden everyone thinks it's a 90% increase. That's actually not the reality of what's happened in the area. So always be very careful, particularly of smaller towns or smaller areas with statistical anomalies like that. From our perspective, one of the things, we try and approach investment as conservatively as possible. We look for investment for the long term. Some of the things you mentioned are very appropriate. Infrastructure and investment and so on are things we certainly look out for with the Blue Wealth research methodology. However, when there are uncertain times, we generally tend to gravitate towards employment. Where are the tenants? Where is the employment? Where are the people? And generally we will gravitate towards the bigger cities because that gives us a bit more protection on the downside. Now, will Narendra grow over the coming years in terms of capital growth? It may well. Would I put my money into Narendra over, some parts of northern Melbourne or some parts of, suburban Brisbane or some parts of, even some parts of Perth, which may be showing some recovery? I'm not sure I would. From our perspective, not only are you looking to maximise your upside, Nick, but you also need to manage and protect your downside.
Good advice, Tony, from and quite detailed for that area. So thank you very much there. We have another call on the line, Anne from Newcastle, calling about investment loans for purchasing investment properties, interest rates, how to negotiate with the banks, and changes on investment loans. Anne, are you on the line?
Yes, thank you. Hello. Look, the situation is a deposit which is around 37% of the purchase of a house in that vicinity. The house needs to be purchased as an investment property first because it won't be able to be used as a residence for about 12 months because of relocation. It's basically buying ahead of moving back to the area. Now, so it has to be bought as an investment property, which means it'll almost be, well, it will be positively geared because the rent, I assume, looking at, well, that's the other question, is about, what sort of interest rates are competitive at the moment for an interest-only loan, and do you suggest that's the way to go? So really, an investment property first, moving into it in about 12 months, then I would recommend probably changing to a principal and interest. But isn't this a competitive type loan that should be sought after by a bank? The Big Four aren't really looking very positively on this. I don't know why.
Steve, some thoughts on that?
Well, there's a few unknowns there for us. Look, I agree with everything you're saying on the surface, being have it interest only until you move into it in 12 months' time, then change it over to a P&I or a principal and interest loan. 37% deposit, banks should be crawling over themselves to give you the money. Now, there's a few sort of uncertainties that we don't know: employment, serviceability, income, where exactly is the property, what sort of condition. But on the surface, banks should be all over you, and don't worry and don't stick to just the major fours. There's 1,000 lenders out there. Maybe go to the second tier lenders who are very competitive in the market at this point in time. But I'd also suggest, if you're not already, utilise a broker. The brokers have the muscle to be able to, and the spread to be able to put your circumstances and your situation and then just blanket the market for the best result for you. But look, on the surface, there's no reason why you shouldn't get the loan.
Tony, anything to add?
I was just going to say exactly what Steve said there at the end, I think. And it's like with everything, if you're looking for someone to help you with a very specialised area, use an expert. Yeah? We're surrounded by some of the best mortgage brokers in the country, and they really are able to wade their way through lots of different loan products and identify a lender who would fall over themselves for your particular type of loan. Now, different lenders have different specialties, and the beauty of the mortgage broker is that they can identify who would best suit your circumstances and get you the best possible loan. So, yeah, I'm with Steve on that. Find a good broker.
And look, and good advice from the panel there. I think I'm going to come in with very similar on that. I think it seems like something that's simple, but there's obviously something a bit complex about it. Your situation, the property, where it is, something like that. One thing I'd add, though, is this is where intended to be a principal place of residence. So after the fact, it becomes your house, and you've obviously decided that you want to live there, and that's the one that you want to be in after that time. So that period of time to start with, where as an investor the loan may not be right, you've got to think more, I think, or mostly about the long term for your situation, because it's the house you want to be in, and that's why you're being there in the first place. So first up in our emails this week comes a question from Matt, who asks, we're looking at a second investment property. We still like Deception Bay, but also considering some other options to diversify. Keen to know your thoughts on Redbank Plains or Ipswich. We're looking at the sub $300,000 purchase price with areas that have long-term capital growth prospects. Steve, your thoughts on those Deception Bay, on those areas?
Sounds like Matt wants what everyone else wants.
Can I have a few of those?
Look, at the end of the day, look, it's a really interesting question because, once again, not knowing your circumstances, but both areas, I believe, will offer a little bit of different upside in the medium and long-term future. Deception Bay, for me, is one of those funny areas because it had such massive growth last property cycle and then very quickly got into this hugely oversupplied scenario, and it's only been up until recently that that's been absorbed. So that sort of a town's always going to be prone to supply and demand issues. So for me, it is not in the top 10 places that I'd be wanting to put my money at this stage of the cycle, even from a long-term perspective, because at the end of the day, cash flow is not that good compared to other areas. Redbank Plains, good area. Personally invest there. I would be looking for larger blocks there, something that gives you a little bit of uniqueness or an upside that's out of the norm. Cash flow is relatively good, and it's also coming off the bottom of the curve. But the trick to that area is keeping out of floodplains where the legs get wet, so to speak, and looking for something that's unique, because I think the growth there is going to be okay. And Ipswich itself, Ipswich offers this vast area of land to invest in, and there's a lot of areas there that get wet. And you mentioned earlier on in one of the conversations about the data being wrong just because of the small sample volume. Well, Ipswich, in my opinion, is quite the opposite. You've got a large sample to choose from, but the data is actually very, very different, purely street by street and ends of the street, from where things were flooded badly and they sell for a lower price, and something that perhaps didn't. There's a lot of vacant land there, however, so Ipswich, be a little bit careful. However, there's touted to be some 56,000 jobs there by 2026, purely because of the infrastructure that's been putting, or the infrastructure's been putting in there. There's some pretty big jobs growth in the pipeline, massive amounts of development. But having said that, I don't think that I'd be going for some of the newer stuff in the Ipswich region. There's a real chance there that the growth could go one way or the other, being that it could either end up a slum, and we've talked about this before, because there's just too much in a concentrated area, or it actually could be perform very, very well. And I know that's a kind of dodgy answer, but that'd be one of the areas where I'd want to sit back and actually see the growth take place.
Tony, anything to add?
No, mate. That's a fantastic answer. For me, like I said earlier, I'd probably move closer to Brisbane. There are some areas that represent better value. You may have to pay a little bit more, but I think in terms of your long-term capital growth prospects, they'll be significantly improved.
I think one thing that's brought there, Steve, is Ipswich especially has a lot of those new development areas, and I think sometimes when I'm looking for properties, those newer areas that exist there, I'm sometimes looking in the suburb next to it to identify value. Well, yeah, still the same suburb, but if the new properties, and I think Deception Bay's probably got a similarity here, where the new properties are X dollars, but the two-bedroom apartment's a little bit older. How much is that? Or the older one, is there a massive difference between those two numbers? Can it be worth actually looking at the other type of property that exists in the same area, yeah, or are they really oversold in the upper new stuff?
That's a really good point, because, and once again, coming back to the Ipswich area, when you look at the figures, it's areas that are just outside the council area, being suburbs such as Bouval that has some fantastic growth, but they're older areas, they're established areas, and they've done very, very well.
Well, thanks for tuning in. It's time for a break. But when we return, you'll have another chance to get a hold of a copy of Margaret's new book, How to Achieve Property Success. But you'll have to ask a question, and it has to be selected. So simply call us now on 1300 30 34 35, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. Welcome back. It's great to have you with us this week. I'm Bradley Beer, and joining me to answer your questions is Steve Waters from Wright Property Group and Tony Hayek from Blue Wealth Property. I'm sure you have a question for us, so pick up the phone, dial 1300 30 34 35, or email us at property@skynews.com.au. And we have Frank on the line from Sydney. You have a question for the panel, Frank?
Yeah, I do. How are you, boys? How you going tonight?
Yeah, well, thanks, mate.
That's the way. I was just, I'm in the in the market at the moment. I'm looking at purchasing another investment property. I've got about 850 to spend. I was just wondering what area I'm looking at the moment is Springwood, which is the Lower Blue Mountains area, or Appin, which is down south. With what do you guys think? And it's also is R3 zoning. Could that be a bonus for the future?
Steve, Springwood versus Appin and R3 zoning.
Awesome. Look, Springwood is a great area. That whole Blue Mountains area is has had some fantastic growth. I'm just not quite sure if it's the right time in this cycle to be purchasing. Well, in Sydney, full stop. Appin, on the other hand, is further down south, midway between Sydney and Wollongong. Some great opportunities there too, but there's also a lot of vacant land there as well, which they may release as time goes on. We're close to Camden, so you're going to have the expansion from there. But once again, the zoning, when I'm looking to negotiate property, or when I'm doing the numbers on the property, the zoning for me is always an afterthought. It's a bonus there. I'm really wanting it to stand on its own two legs, because zoning can be yanked from you in any way, shape or form very, very quickly, and you're left with something perhaps that you've overpaid for. So just do the numbers in their very raw form. But having said that, I'm not really sure with 800,000, 850 to spend, that Appin or Springwood would be the top five for me.
Tony, anything to add?
Yeah, agreed. I think, spending that much money anywhere in Sydney at the peak of a cycle with record low yields is not the smart play. I think it's probably time for you to look interstate, Frank. There'll be better opportunities both north and south, but it probably means you need to get a bit of advice and a bit of support. And I'd probably split the 850 or 900 into a couple of properties, diversify my risk a little, and potentially diversify my opportunities. So that would be our take on it.
And look, Frank, good advice from the panel there. And I think the split, I've always bought probably properties at a lesser value than that, and we've had a lot of growth through that Western Sydney corridor, and we're probably at an upper end of that market. I would agree with both of the guys on that. Spreading further afield, it seems to me, it suggests you probably live close to that area, and therefore you like that area. And I think also on development, if you're buying as an investor where development is potential upside, treat the property as an investment on its own 2 feet, as something I've done in the past, and you're not forced to develop then. Look, and on some other news this week, according to Biz Shrapnel analysts, new property data suggests that property owners are facing steep falls in house prices and a weakening rental market as a new wave of apartment development combines with stalling population growth, creating a potential oversupply of apartments and serious vacancy issues to bite all capital cities by June 2019. Homes in Sydney and Melbourne and Adelaide are likely to sustain falls of 2%. Sydney's median apartment price is predicted to fall by 5%, Melbourne as much as 8%, Brisbane 6%, Darwin 4%, and Adelaide and Perth around 2%. Our capital cities are building apartments at record rates on the back of investor demand, according to Biz Shrapnel. And as the projects are completed, it's likely there will not be enough tenants to support rents and also values on completion. However, Industry experts believe the predictions are bearish, and economists dismiss the suggestion that widespread price falls will undermine the stability of local banks. Home buyers and property investors have suggested they're not prepared to delay buying property for fear of a downturn and will capitalise on an accommodating lending environment and low interest rates while they can. Now, it's quite interesting that, guys, every month, every week, or whenever I come on this show, there's another doom and gloom story about property.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I read that article today.
And here's another one. And obviously there's things either side of that. And Tony, you're in this new apartment space a little bit more, so I guess some of your take on this would be interesting.
Well, mate, I read that article today, and they're certainly ripping and a tearing, weren't they? In there, there was some doom and gloom stuff. And the funny thing about BIS shrapnel is there was a report only 6 months ago that was almost completely contradictory to this. It's almost like they've been influenced themselves by what's happening in the media. And one of the things that's really important in our business is always to bring our clients perspective. And I think people generally lose perspective in very bullish markets. They get overconfident, they think they can do things themselves, they generally overcommit, or they get very bearish in the environment we're in now. And of course the media turns on a coin because they're interested in selling advertising. They're not really interested in what's in the client's best interest or what they're going to read. So look, from our perspective, keep your wits about you. The environment as it stands right now will provide better opportunities for clients to make, to get their hands on good deals more than it has in the last 3 years. The lending environment is very supportive. If you buy the appropriate property, your yields are strong, and if you buy in the right area, vacancies are low enough for you to be able to manage your risk, and you should be looking to hold that property long term. And if you go back to the fundamentals of why we buy property, good areas, right property, right market, right time, get the support, hold for the long term, you will reap the rewards. Do not panic. Rule number one. And for me, when I read articles like that, it's actually really sad, because those articles are the ones that led all those Sydney-siders 5 years ago to sell their property. I mean, I can pull out now 1,000 articles from 2011 telling Sydney-siders how bad their property market was, and that there's a glut of property, the property market's going to go backwards. Parramatta in that period grew 106%, right? So if I read this article in 2011 and I'm a little bit nervous about my property, what do, Brett? I sell.
You think about selling?
Yes. Steve comes around, right, because Steve's a very clever guy and he's got some good research and he knows the market and he maintains perspective through the ups and the downs, buys the property off panicked Brad, who read the article in the paper, and Steve walks away with 400 grand and Brad's still kicking his dog. I mean, please, maintain perspective, all right? Extreme anything is unhealthy for anyone. And the reason our clients have made so much money in property over so many years is because we've been holding their hand to maintain that perspective, buy the appropriate property, have a long-term view, and reap the rewards.
Steve, anything to add?
That was pretty well said, really, at the end of the day, perspective. But look, I love when I see all these negative stories, because at the end of the day, the media has a lot to say in regards to perhaps persuading a market or consumer confidence at the end of the day. Price of money, consumer confidence, supply and demand is going to drive our market all the time. Yep. Now, a little bit more on what you said. I couldn't agree 100% more, because it was only those that sold their properties during that downtime that really crystallised their loss. At the end of the day, cash flow is king. So no matter whether there's whatever the media says, if you can control your cash flow to a point where if the market goes up, it goes down, it goes sideways, this is a long-term investment vehicle. You're not going to get rich overnight. And anyone who says you can, I'd suggest run the other way. Control it over a long period of time, look after your cash flow, and I think all will be okay. Having said that, there are going to be areas of perhaps oversupply. There's no question about that. But the fundamentals or the research you're doing beforehand and looking after the fundamentals should, if you're looking in the right direction, be steering you away from those areas that are going to have those oversupply scenarios.
Yeah. Have we got any more times?
Yeah, look, no, we're nearly out of time there, but I think, the good points from both on the panel there, and I think a couple of things that stick out to me to add to that are really, we have strong banks, we've reduced the LVRs, we don't have all this 95% lending around now. I see things that talk about properties into 2019, and property, I do believe, should be a long-term investment, and that's a very short-term period of time. There's a lot of cost to get in, cost to get out, so I think long-term should be the way that we actually think about property. I also think in my nearly 18 years at BMT dealing with property investors, we tend to have a herd mentality. We follow what happens. We drive the price growth too hard. The developers then can get the money. They build too much stock. It takes a while to take it up. We come back around. There's a lack of accommodation, and look, it happens differently in different areas, and sometimes we do it worse than others. But we keep following this herd mentality, and we keep actually doing this to this market. It just goes in cycles, and it's different at different parts of the different parts of the country. We have another question from Carlo tonight. This one will actually be for me because it's about depreciation.
Oh,
so Carlo
please, you can have it, mate.
I've recently purchased an investment property whereby the previous owners provided me a copy of the depreciation schedule. Am I able to use that, or do I need to get a new one under my new name? Now, Carlo, that's a fairly simple question that we do get asked pretty regularly, and the previous depreciation schedule has been prepared for the previous owner. For them, it's in their name. So legally and logistically, what you want is one that's prepared for you, for your tax return, and for you. The other thing is, the way we treat the deductions for you as an investor is to maximise your deductions at the time when you buy that property. The way we value the items, everything that's done at that time is about you, your situation, and getting your deductions properly. So legally, it's right or pertinent to get it done again. And secondly, it's better probably for your deductions. So we've got to go to a break now, so I assume you've got some questions. If so, please call us on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. We'll see you in a moment. Welcome back to the show. I'm Bradley Beer, and joining me tonight on the show is Steve Waters from Wright Property Group, and Tony Hayek from Blue Wealth Property. We still have plenty of time left for you to call in with your comments or questions, and you may even be this week's book winner. So call now on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Let's go straight over to an email at the moment, and we have an email from Matt who asks, what are the keys that you look for in rental property investments? Well, guys, fairly broad question there. So, Steve, I might start with you.
Longevity in the market, to be honest with you. I really, because I'm a very conservative person and so is my approach, I really want to make sure, I want to know how that property is going to perform in not just a good market but also a bad market, because everyone tends to hang their hat and do their figures and purchase in a market like that we've got now. So I want to know how it's going to perform when things are normal or if not bad. Cash flow is king. It's always king. It enables you to be able to hold the asset for a period of time through the ups and the downs, and then, I suppose, realise its profit in the later years of your life. And look for signs of oversupply. I think it's always being diligent. People tend to look at property investing as this passive vehicle, and in my experience, some 16, 17 years now, property requires constant attention. That doesn't mean that it sort of consumes you, but I still think you need to give it the attention it deserves, because it's going to do very well for you if you look after it, but it's also going to ruin you if you don't.
Mm.
Tony?
Well, I mean, let me go straight to the Blue Wealth research model. Infrastructure, population, demographics, supply and demand, economics and employment. So they're the four key macro drivers that drive property markets. The identification of those drivers is essentially the job of the Blue Wealth Property Research team. There's a 4-minute video on our homepage that tells you exactly what we look for in investment property. Go and jump on and have a look, bluewealth.com.au. But the asset itself then comes back to, and we all share the same concepts. It'll be about the appropriate design, its quality, its amenity, its appropriateness to its marketplace. And of course, Steve's mentioned several times tonight, it's cash flow. As a property investor, the first question we always ask is, who is the renter? Yeah? And what does your yield look like? Because these are key factors for your ability to hold the asset long enough for it to grow. Because growth is what makes you wealthy. It's not the cash flow. Cash flow, as Steve's saying, helps you hold the asset long enough for it to grow, which is where the real wealth is made. And I think that's a mistake often that investors make. They confuse the two. Cash flow is not the way you're going to become wealthy. Cash flow is what's going to help you hold the asset long enough for it to make you wealthy. So, and that's a key difference.
Good answers from both on the panel, and I guess some of the points that I would add to that are a lot of it actually comes down to your personal situation, your risk profile. You need some good advice from someone that actually knows your personal numbers, how comfortable you are with the amount of debt that's required to buy a property, what can you do to mitigate some of the risks, and just really making sure that it actually suits you. I've looked over the past at different things over time. I've looked for things I can develop. I can renovate. I've had to do a lot of renovating because I wanted to grow equity faster so I could actually get into more property at the time. So lots of renovations. Cash flow is obviously very important, but growth is where the real money's made. Cash flow helps you on the way through. We have Philip from Sydney on the phone. Philip, you have a question. Welcome this evening for the panel.
Yeah, sure. So I currently have two investment properties that are both in Queensland. So there's one in Redbank that I bought in 2013 near Ipswich, and I bought in Crestmead, which is near Logan, in 2015. And I'm just in the stages now of trying to look for my third investment property, and I just wanted to know what your thoughts were of Newcomb, which is near Geelong in Victoria, and Kalangor, which is to the north of Brisbane. For Newcomb, I know most of Melbourne have had solid growth in the last 5 years, but this suburb in particular that I've kind of spotted was that it was near 5 kilometres of Geelong CBD, and it was quite affordable, and it hasn't had really much growth in the last 5 years. So I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on those suburbs for me.
So I'll break this up a little bit, Tony. Newcomb, some of your thoughts near Geelong?
Yeah, I don't mind that. I don't know too much about Geelong. My research team would know more, but I know that the base fundamentals of Geelong are pretty good. They've an eccentric mayor, and they're certainly making some changes down there. There are some good fundamentals for good properties if you do good research around Geelong. It's not an area that I would say stay completely away from. And I mean, going back to your overall strategy, if you've already got two in Queensland, in and around southeast Queensland, then I would probably look to Newcomb before I look to Kalangor. But I'll let Steve talk about Kalangor in a little more detail. Steve, Kalangor, you've been involved in a lot of stuff around there.
Yeah, quite a bit. First of all, I'd say congratulations. Two properties is an awesome start. You'd have done really well out of Redbank since 2013 and Crestmead in 15, where you'd have seen some pretty handy growth, certainly over the last 12 months there too. Look, I think with Kalangor, north of Brisbane, my only concern with that particular area is there's a lot of greenfield around there, and there's the chance to be sort of overtaken by a lot of new house and land packages, be it all, not right in the vicinity, but within a 10-minute drive. Some of the older areas of Caboolture might be a handy proposition for you. And back into Newcomb, I suppose. Look, I like Geelong as well, and there's a bit of a trend here with your investing pattern taking on those affordable corridors, which is essentially what we do as well. And Geelong's got some pretty handy growth looking forward to it. It's coming off a low. Just be very careful where you invest in Geelong, in and around Geelong. And I think Geelong's actually one of the underrated areas of Victoria, especially for the affordable corridors.
And some good advice from the panel there. Looks like, Philip, you're into those sort of more affordable areas. You've done well out of those two properties. And once again, I say congratulations for getting in and actually having a go. And they've performed well for you, so I wish you all the best with the rest of that journey. Now we have an email from Danielle who asks, I'm 47 and my husband is 51. Our house is in the northern suburbs of Wollongong and is worth approximately $700,000. We owe $300,000 on it. Are we too old to start investing? Steve, we'll start with you on that one.
North Wollongong. I lived there for a period of time. You've seen some massive growth there as well over the last couple of years. Look, it's a really hard question for any of us to really answer, not knowing your personal situation. But look, we have clients in that kind of an age bracket. But the type of investing, if you were to invest from this kind of age bracket onwards, you'd have to be very, very deliberate, I believe, in what you invested in. And you need some really good financial advice around that. So you need to first, I believe, create a team around you, good accountant, good financial planner, good strategist, good brokers, and then maybe entertain from there.
Tony, are we too old to invest?
Danielle, 47. You're a baby. I'm 42, so if you're too old to invest, then I'm starting to panic now. Look, again, Steve's right. We need to know more about your circumstances. But if you represent Middle Australia, You've certainly got some equity in your home, and well done on that. If you have an income and you want to put yourself in a position to get ahead, then no, you're not too old to invest. But I think, like everybody, getting the right advice will help you make the best possible decision. And what you don't have, that say a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old would have, is some room for error. So you want to make sure you get it as right as possible. Someone who's 20 or 25 or 30 has a bit more time for the market to forgive them. You probably don't have as much time. However, you're 47. If you're planning to live to be 70 or 80, there's a few cycles left in you yet, Daniel, and that will help you and your husband retire more comfortably.
Okay, great advice from the panel there, and I think I tend to agree. 47, a few years older than me.
I was going to say, how old are you, mate? Aren't you? Come on.
I'm 40.
What? Come on, Brad.
So still plenty of years left, but I really think the strategy for you is a little different, maybe because you don't have so much time on your side. Your own personal situation, much as per the panel here with Steve, needs to be considered, and the fact that you don't have sort of as much time up your sleeve where you need to move into that probably more retirement phase, which is good in some ways, but you don't have as much time to actually get some of that debt down out of that property, being that investment property. Now we have one last email here in this break session from Kylie, who asks, I'm looking at buying a house in Deer Park, Sunshine West area in Victoria. Concerned about the amount of subdivision occurring in these suburbs. Do you think this will be an issue with vacancy rates into the future? Steve?
Be concerned, I suppose, is my easy answer. Anywhere where there's a lot of vacant land, anywhere where there's a lot of subdivision happening, you need to look forward a little bit and see how that's going to hamper, if at all, supply and demand in the area, and therefore your cash flow and therefore growth. Having said that, if you just move a couple of suburbs across into perhaps Sunshine, Albion, we've personally bought a lot of property there. Admittedly, it's the older stock though, the older red brick units and the older houses on a bigger block of land, and they've done very, very well for ourselves. But I think more to the point though, you need to see how this particular property is going to fit in your portfolio if you already have one, or where it's going to take you from here. How's it going to affect cash flow? How's it going to affect your growth? Is this a medium term? Is it development? There's a lot of answers there that I think you need to answer first. But on the surface, look to supply and demand, and is there going to be that equilibrium, or is it going to be too much of one or the other?
Tony, anything to add to that?
No, mate, I think that's a pretty clear answer. I think you should always make sure that you've got clarity around the rental market before you invest.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Well, thanks for tuning in. It's time for another break. But when we return, we'll be answering any last remaining questions for tonight. So get your question in now by calling 1300 30 34 35, or you can also email us on property@skynews.com.au. Welcome back to Your Money, Your Call. I'm Bradley Beer, and it's been a great night with Steve Waters from Wright Property Group and Tony Hayek from Blue Wealth Property. Our lines are closed for tonight, but we have time for these last questions. We have an email from Andrew who asks, what are your thoughts on Beenleigh in Queensland? Appears that the town centre has had a makeover and the Logan Council are trying to attract businesses into the town. Would it be a good place to invest? Okay, Steve, I'm going to go to you again here. You've been active in that area, I think, over the past. What are your thoughts on Beenleigh?
Just a little bit. Look, I personally like it. I've just settled a property there and exchanging on another one. I think that the town centre has really pushed the area along over the especially last month. And if we go back to the beginning of the night where we talk about how the media has a lot to do with a market profile or what the consumer confidence is, we've been talking about Beenleigh and that southeastern corridor now, or the Logan Shire, for probably the last 2 years, and it's been very, very well producing for us. However, it's only in the last 3 months that the media have cottoned onto it, and especially what's happening in Beenleigh. As a result of that, and you can ask any real estate agent up there, the phones are ringing hot, and often that's too late. However, in this circumstance, I still think there's a lot of legs left in the market because it's covering all the key things. It's covering cash flow, it's covering growth, infrastructure, proximity, consumer confidence, and at the end of the day, you can own it for less than you can rent it. And to me, that's a pretty good start.
Tony, anything to add on Beenleigh?
No, I reckon that's very accurate, and some parts of that are benefiting from the expansion and the evolution of Brisbane as a city. And I think what's happened in the cities of Sydney and Melbourne is happening in Brisbane, and it will happen more and more. And you'll see that the northern end, places like the northern end of the Gold Coast, the southern end of the Sunshine Coast, will start to benefit from the economic and employment expansion of Brisbane over the coming decades. Yeah.
I think also to add to that, the expenditure on infrastructure, which is what people kind of need. You need shopping centres, and when there's newer, nicer shopping centres, I've been to Beenleigh a number of times and done some work on shopping centres even there and depreciation schedules. And having something new brings a little bit more life to an area that's not. It's a lower a little bit of a lower socio-economic area, often a good place to invest, and you've still got that proximity to the areas that we've been talking about on this show as positive for a long, long time.
Correct. Yeah, just one more thing to add on that. Just with Beenleigh, and you mentioned about sort of infrastructure and shopping centres, there's 3 towers there with commercial underneath, and if you go up the road into Marsden, where they're massively expanding the shopping centre there as well. Just one caveat though, as with any of South East Queensland, check your flood overlay maps because parts of Beenleigh, Eagleby and all these areas did get wet during the floods, so to pay dividends just to check that out.
Great advice from the panel. And we have Paul on the line from Melbourne. Got some question for the panel, Paul? Thank you for coming to the program.
Yes, thank you. The question is about a strategy that I am considering. I bought a mortgagee auction property approximately a year ago, and luckily was able to bid and be successful at well under 20% of the market value of the property. So I got the property at around $900,000. It's now worth over the $1 million mark. So the question for the panel is it wise for me in this situation to consider a complete revaluation, a BMT report, and put in a nice taxation return and get hopefully a good refund, and put some of that money into a new property to go ahead with a new deal where I can go into perhaps 70 or 80% gearing, but this one will not net me any negative gearing advantage because unfortunately, or fortunately from a business point of view, I got a 5-year lease at a very high rental.
So a 5-year lease at a very high rental, I'd suggest it's probably a commercial property then?
No, it's a residential property in a suburb called Greensborough. Okay. Well,
Tony, some thoughts on the strategy going forward?
That's a bit of a web there, Paul. There are a lot of things to consider. I think Steve's given this answer a couple of times tonight, but we really need to know a bit more about your circumstances. You know, what's your income? How much cash at hand do you have? What kind of equity do you have in that or other properties, or in that one there? I'm always a bit wary of the mortgagee in possession auction environment, because if the seller's doing their job, they're taking it to auction to get market rate. So I'm a bit, 20% undervalued in any kind of market. Always is a bit surprising to me. But Paul, what I would do is I would put myself in front of a good accountant, a good broker, a good planner, 1 or 3 of those. One of them probably has associations with the other 2, and put yourself in the right situation from a knowing your numbers type perspective, and then that will give you clarity as to what your next move should be. All things being equal, I'm a big supporter of building your asset base as big as you can with the money you can afford, but you need to know how much you can afford.
Steve, something to add?
I think you've answered it all. Without knowing your situation, it's very hard for us to give sort of any real answer. But congratulations on 20% under market value, no matter how you got it, mortgagee auction or whatever.
We need to find some of those.
That's pretty awesome. Do you want a job?
and Paul is a buyer. Steve is a buyer's agent. Now, I think one thing to add, I guess, is when you're considering, it really comes down, you're very right, it comes down to your own personal circumstances, and $900,000 is a fairly reasonable expensive property. Think about it as an investment property now, and would you buy that as an investment property now? Does it stop you from buying other investment properties, which is the thing you need to crunch with the specialists that you get involved to help you with that relate to your scenario. There's a lot of costs of getting back out of a property and some capital gains tax if you're over 12 months. And what would you put that money into? And if it's more property, consider that versus the type of properties that you might look to buy with the proceeds, and consider what's best and compare that into your sort of situation afterwards. We have another email now from Mandy, and Mandy asks, I'm trying to encourage some friends not to buy an investment property in Nowra because I don't believe it's the best opportunity for them in Australia. Do you think Nowra will grow in the short to medium term? They believe there is coming growth due to some infrastructure, i.e. the new jail, a freeway, a bypass back to Wollongong, Sydney, and the Stockton land holdings. So off to the panel. We might start with you, Steve.
Thanks, mate. Look, it's a recipe for disaster if you're giving your friends investment advice. Like, there's going to be fights over a barbecue or whatever it may be. At the end of the day, Nowra is one of those places that it's had a really good run purely because of its affordability. You get that urban sprawl from an affordability point of view out of Sydney, out of Wollongong and further south. Nowra can be a street-by-street scenario. It depends on even which side of the river you are. There's a little bit of government housing down there, some high crime rates. I'd probably ask or tell your friends to perhaps do a little bit more research around the area, and if you're hell-bent on giving them some advice, maybe encourage them to go along to some education forums or some websites where perhaps they could learn a little bit more about research at the end of the day.
Tony, anything to add?
Great advice. I think, again, get some support, get some advice, put yourself in front of the right people, and I think they can, they can help your friends. Sounds to me like you've got a relatively mature understanding of where people should and shouldn't be investing. But I certainly wouldn't be putting my money into Nowra because I agree with you. It wouldn't be in my top handful of places to invest in Australia. There are better places.
Thanks, Tony. Great advice from the panel there. I think Nowra or wherever it is, I think the first thing I think is that the fundamentals of why we invest in areas is what we need to make sure we're both learning more about in this particular scenario. Your friends and your family are often probably not the best people to take that advice from unless they're actually qualified to give some and look at your situations, and can definitely create some interesting times. I think the media, and we talked some about the media tonight, drives sometimes the decision on property, drives what it looks like, and we look at some media and it's negative and we think maybe it's right sometimes, and sometimes it's very wrong, because bad news kind of writes headlines a little bit better than good news. I think Nowra in itself, it does have that that proximity to Sydney that we talk about. There's places like the Central Coast that have this proximity to an area that's growing strongly, but it has had some of that growth already in not too distant terms. The ability in those areas to probably be able to work away from the office, work from home, I think in the medium to long-term future are probably positive for those types of areas, but I don't think it's quite as easy that you never really have to come to the office just yet. But I think eventually one day we'll get to there, so there may be better areas that might show some growth a little bit earlier in the time. Well, this brings us to the end of our show tonight. Next week, Margaret's still away and Lisa Montgomery will be back. I'll actually be joining her on the panel along with Damien Collins from Momentum Wealth from WA, who might give us some Perth perspective at the moment. So be sure to keep your questions coming. Thanks tonight go to both Tony and to Steve for helping me to answer your questions this week. They've been very helpful. Thanks also to all our callers. We had a lot of callers tonight. This week, our question of the week goes to Philip, who asked about Newcombe and Kalanga. I think it's a big congratulations, Philip, to actually get in, do some investing. And the next part of your journey requires a bit more learning, and I'd love to see you read that book, learn a little bit more about those areas into the future. If you could now email me on email us on yourmoneyyourcall@destiny.com.au, Margaret will send you a copy of that book, but you need to email in order to actually get that book. Thanks for being with us tonight, and don't forget to join us again next week here on Sky U's Your Money, Your Call. Thank you.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.